Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. We are going to discuss the Atchafalaya, or Atchafalaya, or however you say it, from The Control of Nature by John McPhee. This was published in 1989. And this book has 3 chapters in it, and one is about the Atchafalaya, which we are going to talk a bit about, and the other is about the Los Angeles Mountains, and another one is about cooling the lava when a volcano was actually going towards a town. Surtsey, I think it was. Maybe, no, that's a volcano somewhere. No, that's a volcano around the other side of the world. It was in Iceland anyways. And, it's some Icelandic name I can't pronounce. So there's lava going towards the town. They actually cooled the front of it and made the lava flow around the other side or whatever. And Los Angeles is surrounded by these enormous catchment basins that fill up yearly, and they clean them out in the dry season, and then they fill back up. And it's because the mountains around Los Angeles are made of crumbly nonsense, and they wash away. Any rain just washes them away because they've been pushed. They're out of a floodplain. They've been pushed up, and so they're very crumbly, garbagey mountains. They're not made of granite or any such thing. They're just fill dirt from floodplain that's been pushed up. So that's why they are so garbagey mountains, and that's why they don't act like regular mountains, and they have these huge slides and lots of debris comes down a lot, and the catchment basements that they have are enormous, and we're not going to talk about those. We're not going to talk about the volcano that they thwarted. So those are the 3 chapters in this book, and it's an excellent book, so you should get this book and read it. I'm going to talk about the Atchafalaya. Probably the reason I chose to do this is because I think people might be more aware of the catchment basins around Los Angeles, and it's easier to get your head around, and people might be easily made aware of that situation where the lava was coming towards the town and they cooled it off. But do you know about the situation with the Atchafalaya? Now it's supposed to rhyme with jambalaya, so Atchafalaya. So Atchafalaya, and so however you pronounce it, you'll hear me pronounce it different ways. You could just put that down to my basic incompetence. 300 miles up from the mouth of the Mississippi River, there's a navigation lock that allows ships to drop out of the river. Now, this didn't come into existence until 1963, but it's there now and it's in use. And let us remember that a river's job is to get to the sea, always by the shortest route, or to the lowest basin that it can reach. Always by the shortest route, right? If there's a steeper route that it can go, it's going to want to cut through and go down the steeper route. That's just the natural situation that we're in. And there is this place where there's a 30-foot drop. And we take our boats over, and then they lower it down through one of these things, and they open the gate, and the boat goes out. Now that was true up from 63 on up, but up until then, there was a river that just flowed from the Mississippi out into this area called the Atchafalaya. And it's Cajun country. Now, long ago, the Atchafalaya was fed by a very, very small bit of the Mississippi. And it was fed by such a small trickle that you could actually put a long plank and walk across it. You could bridge it that way. And there are people who were alive in our lifetime who walked across the Atchafalaya that way. Today it's 1/3 the size of the Mississippi. So it's an extremely large river on anybody's, unless you're comparing it to the Rio Grande and the Amazon, then it's a big river. So there's another river that goes into the Mississippi called the Red River, or it did until 1945 when there was a big flood, and it made itself a path into the Atchafalaya. Because it wants to go down the Atchafalaya, which is 30 feet lower than where the Mississippi currently runs. Here's another problem. The Mississippi is bringing silt down and pushing up in front of it this huge pan of silt, and it's going to want to go around that. It's building a hill in front of itself. And the base of the Mississippi is moving up. And so anyways, welcome to this situation. Up until 1963, there wasn't a lock to bring the ships down out of the Mississippi. If it captures, if the Atchafalaya were to capture Mississippi, or the whole Mississippi River, and it would have by now, it would have done it probably in 1973. If that were to happen, Baton Rouge and everything that we think of from 300 miles up the Mississippi, all that on down would have been reduced to a tidal swamp at the end and a seasonal trickle, and only would have ran full in flood years. Now, that happened. There was a switch like that 1,000 years ago. There was a switch like that again 200 years AD. These switches keep happening. We stopped it. The Army Corps of Engineers put something called flood control structure on the old river flood control. So there's a situation where we've got the Atchafalaya and the Red River here, and the Mississippi River here. And then there's these little, a stream here where it used to cross, and when in high water years it would force a lot across there, and that was cutting deeper and deeper. And so they have taken control of that area. Army Corps of Engineers has taken control of it. And the flood really wants to happen. It really wants to happen. So someday that might happen. Might happen in our lifetime, ladies and gentlemen. We'll have to see. We can wait and see. Now, here's an interesting thing. This guy went to high school. Now, this book, you'll have to get the book and read it if you want all the tidbits, because he does like interviews with the guys that work on the structures and stuff. And I'm going to put, I'm leaving out most of that. We're just going over information here, or whatever I want to go over. But one of these guys says, his name is Rabelais, he says, they used to teach us in high school that one day there were going to be structures up here to control the flow of that water, but I never dreamed that I was going to be on one of those structures. Somebody way back yonder, which is dead and gone now, visualized it. We had some pretty sharp teachers, end quote. So there were people before the 1940s and 50s who realized that something was going to have to be done, or else the lower Mississippi was going to be dry. And in the 1940s they began, in the 1950s it was being built, in the 60s it was in place and in use. And then in 73 it cracked, and then they put up a whole bunch of other structures to, I think there's like 4 huge gates now, and there used to be 1 or something like that. But anyways, the little details are not a concern to us. Louisiana exists in its present form with that huge arc out there because the Mississippi River has jumped here and there within an arc about 200 miles wide, quote, like a pianist playing with one hand, frequently and radically changing course, surging over the left or the right, and going off in utterly new directions. Always it's the river's purpose to get to the Gulf by the shortest, steepest gradient. So that is the battle they're fighting. Let's see. Here's a list of the industries that are dependent on the Mississippi, or some of these might have gone by now, but some of them are surely still there. And so this is the sort of checklist that the government was looking at, saying, well, if we don't spend gazoodles of money to stop this from happening, and the Atchafalaya does capture the Mississippi, here are the industries that will have to shut down because they require a gargantuan supply of fresh water, and that's why they're on the shore of the Mississippi. B.F. Goodrich, I.E. DuPont, Union Carbide, Reynolds Metals, Shell, Mobil, Texaco, Exxon, Monsanto, Uniroyal, Georgia Pacific, Hydrocarbon Industries, Vulcan Materials, Nalco Chemical, Freeport Chemical, Dow Chemical, Allied Chemical, Stauffer Chemical, Hooker Chemical, Rubicon Chemical, American Petrofina. And those were the big ones. Those were the big ones. There's also lots and lots of little industry down there. that would have died if this had been if the Atchafalaya had captured the Mississippi. Now, a thought occurs to me about Soviet Russia and how they had taken the water that was running into the Aral Sea and diverted it to grow cotton and other things out there in the desert. And the Aral Sea dried up, and a huge fishing industry was destroyed, and it caused the chemicals that ran in, it caused these bad dust storms now, and I don't know how bad that is. It might be environmentalist garbage propaganda. But there's this huge dry lake where there used to be a bunch of people fishing for a living, and it was caused by the Soviet government. It occurs to me that we must be doing something right if our government is holding back a river. You know, it's like Denmark, and they're holding back the sea. Not that the government's doing something right, but that our society and our people and our culture and what we're doing. Whereas their society destroyed a resource that was already there, our society is preserving a resource that nature itself would have destroyed. See, and and maybe the Aral Sea was destined to go dry because that water just had to be used. Society just needed it. So maybe that's an argument to be had. Let's see, what else shall we say about it here? Now they keep, let's see. Oh, this is interesting. All right, so 10 miles upriver from the navigation lock, where the collective sediments were thought to be more firm, they dug into a piece of dry ground and built what for a time appeared to be an incongruous waterless bridge. And where the two river systems were like this, and there's the old creek that ran here that was getting bigger and bigger, the Army Corps dug a whole thing up here to just replace all that, to just bypass the little creek and just do the little creek's called the Old River. And so the bypass system's called Old River Control. But it's just a totally new separate river miles north of the old river. 560 feet long, this incongruous waterless bridge stood parallel to the Mississippi and about 1,000 yards back from the water. So it was just built seemingly in the middle of nowhere, just 1,000 feet from the edge of the Mississippi. Between its abutments were 10 piers framing 11 gates that could be lifted, dropped, opened, or shut like windows. To this structure, and through it, there soon would come a new old river, an excavated channel leading in from the Mississippi and out 7 miles to the red Atchafalaya. The Army Corps was not intending to accommodate nature. That's nice, right? Now what's funny is that why were they on this mission? The Army Corps doesn't just go and decide, right? Congress had to order them. And Congress had to order them a specific mission as well. So that's interesting. Let's read on and hear exactly what it was. Its engineers were intending to control it in space and arrest it in time. In 1950, shortly before the project began, the Atchafalaya was taking 30% of the water that came down from the north to the old river. Now that's after that huge flood in 1945 that changed everything over there. So in 1950, it was what it was, and it was totally different from what it was in 1944, but never mind that. In 1950, it was what it was. This water was known as the latitude flow, and it consisted of a little of the red and a lot in the Mississippi. The United States Congress, in its deliberations, decided that, quote, the distribution and flow and sediment in the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers is now in desirable proportion and should be so maintained, end quote. That is like the senators of Rome handing down a decree that, this wall against the Germans should be so maintained, or whatever. And now we look back and we say, yeah, that lasted for 50 years or 100 years or whatever. And we are now doing those things So, and in time, we know that this is doomed, and they might have to, do it in a controlled fashion, or they might have to wait for it to happen in a disaster so that nobody has to pay any money for it and it just kills a bunch of people. However that it happens, it's going to happen. We know that. So Congress handed down that sentence, which gave the 30% ratio, and it should be so maintained. End quote. The Corps was thereby ordered to preserve 1950. So to this day, that's what they're doing up there. Here we are 70 years later, preserving that ratio of those two rivers at that juncture. And it's happening. It's working. In perpetuity, at Old River, 30% of the latitude flow was to pass to the Atchafalaya. The device that resembled a 10-pier bridge was technically a sill or weir, and it was put online in 1963 in an orchestrated sequence of events that flourished the art of civil engineering. The old river was closed. The new old river was opened. Now, you can get the book and read it all. There's a lot of fun stuff. But it says, withal, there was a change of command as the army replaced nature. Now, I have read, let's see, we're on page 10 out of 60 pages in this chapter, and I'm skipping now several pages, skipping 6 or 8 pages. So if you find this interesting, what I'm giving you, you've got to get the book and read it. Now, just why the Army should be involved with all these levee systems, navigations, locks, why is the Army Corps there? Because its presence is an expression of the military strategy and a pure evolutionary tradition. Its depths of origin about 1.75 centuries. So 175 years before this book was written, so we can safely say more than 200 years. How much more than 200 years? The War of 1812. So is 1819 or 207 years now. So it goes to the War of 1812, when the Brits invaded, well, they invaded all over the place. They invaded Maine, they invaded Washington, D.C., and burned the White House. They invaded New Orleans. And, of course, after that, the engineers and the army and the government said, well, we've got to get ready for the next invasion. Now, how will the next invasion come and what will it be like? Obviously, it will be identical to the first invasion, because armies always prepare for the previous war, and that's all you can do. So they built forts where the previous battles occurred, and who did they have do it? The Army Corps of Engineers. Now, it occurs to them at some point that it wouldn't be good if all this stuff got washed away, so it's probably good if they work their way up the stream and put in flood control and stuff, and that's what they did. Let's see. I guess I should probably draw a line here. I don't know how much more I can say or should say. We've spent enough time. I've done almost 20 minutes on this guy's book. No, you should probably get the book and read it if you want to know more. I have outlined some more stuff here, but I shouldn't go over it. You should get the book and read it if you're interested. The Atchafalaya. It will capture the Mississippi River someday. John McAfee is a good place to go for a little information. I might keep reading over this and do another video on it if I find something else I have to tell you about. But I think that I've told you what we need to go over here. And I think that you should get John McAfee's book. And he's got a lot of other books. Let me say that. I'll close with just mentioning a couple of these others. Rising from the Plains. I'm not sure what it's about. Table of Contents. What would that book be about? Giving Good Weight, Coming into the Country, Survival of the Bark Canoe. And then there's this interesting one down here, Oranges. Published in 1967. That was back before the fad of publishing a book about coal, salt, this, that. I wonder what that one's about. Oranges, 1967. So I might be getting some more of his books. This one's an incredibly good read. There you are, ladies and gentlemen. The Atchafalaya. Very interesting.